Hi everyone, Brightbone here, back with another video, and today I want to show you a driver-based privilege escalation. This will work with the AV on. It'll work basically all the time. These are becoming more and more common. I hear on Twitter quite frequently, hey, I've got this new EDR bypass, and it turns out to be a rogue stolen driver. So we're going to first look at the privilege escalation for the driver installation. And then we're going to look at a strategy to detect these things, because I don't think there's much value in this from a red team perspective, but from a blue team perspective, there is tons of value in being able to detect these known bad drivers. So let's take a look at our Windows machine here. I am in C Windows Temp, and I am running as Clint and my usual target. So we'll take a look. Who am I? I am Clint Barton. So if I pop up a little bit here, we'll do who am I, we'll do groups. We'll go find administrators, and that will prove I am in the administrators groups. And as you can see, built-in administrators popped up. I am in the administrators group. So you need to be an administrator to be able to install a driver. So I'm going to install the XamGuard driver, and then I'm going to escalate privileges into system with the XamGuard driver. So we will go ahead and do, we're going to do SC. We're going to create a service based on XamGuard 64.sys, which is a known bad driver. Now this is going to escalate us into kernel level privileges, not just system. So we would be kernel. Here's our path, XAM64.sys. Type is kernel, and then here is our starting of this service. So I'm going to go ahead and start the service right now, and you can see XamGuard 64.sys kernel driver running. So I now have a kernel driver running. I can use a program that is quite simple. kernelexec.exe. This driver was part of a proof of concept for a vulnerability. And someone created this executable to quite simply create a system shell with this driver. So we'll run kernelexec.exe here, and notice we now have a system shell. And if we take a look at what it did, it opens a handle of the driver, token handle 200, token object address, registered with driver, successfully queried, and so on and so forth. As you can see, launch CMD with privilege token, done. And here we can go, who am I? And I now am system. Now installing a service in a lot of cases can make you system, but it doesn't usually happen with a kernel level driver. So Cortex XDR was on that entire time. I've done this through Defender as well. This is something that will slip by most AVs. So if you need a privesc from administrator to system, you can do it this way. Now there are simpler ways. You can quite simply do psexec to do the exact same thing if you just need a system shell. But if you want kernel level, this can give you kernel level. And what that can do is allow you to stop protected processes like EDRs. But in this case, I've shown you the exploitation. Let's focus on the detection, because I think there's a lot more value in the detection here than there is in the exploitation of this, at least as it stands. So XamGuard 64 is a known bad driver. Known bad because it's been used in attacks. Basically, it's been stolen and reused in attacks. So how, as a blue teamer, can you determine a known bad driver is being installed on a system in your environment? Well, quite simply, you can use LOLDrivers.io. This is living off the land drivers. This is a newer project. I know Florian Roth was involved. There are several people in the industry who are deeply involved in this project, and it's a great project. And what it does is it calculates and keeps a log of all of the different drivers that people have seen exposed as part of known attacks. You'll see some very familiar ones here if you look through the list. We'll go search here, and you can search Mimi, and you'll see mimidrive.sys. Most of you will know that that is the Mimikatz driver for the extended functionality for Mimikatz. But this is a great list. But how do I make this actionable? So I've got all these hashes, I have these names, I know that there's vulnerable drivers here. How do I make this actionable? Well, you use threat intelligence management for this. Living off the land drivers, or LOLDrivers, provides two different methods to pull down this data via an API. One is a simple CSV, the other is JSON. There's also a Sigma rule here that if you have sysmon in the environment, you can have sysmon do this for you. I prefer to do this at SIEM, and I'll show you some ways to do that. But let's take a look at how we bring this into a threat intelligence management platform. So here we have MISP. And if you're not familiar with this, I really love this project. This is a threat intelligence and management platform that allows you to put in data around any kind of intrusion that's happened in your environment and then feed it out to different things. So if you have paid threat intelligence feeds, you can bring them into this, you can correlate them across different intrusions that are seen in the industry, and then you can feed them out to your SIEM. You can also create YARA rules, and YARA rules are super useful when you're hunting a threat. So really cool project here. We're just going to log into MISP, and you can see here is our basic MISP layout. We have our list events, we have add event, import from, REST client. But what we are really concerned about here is LOLDrivers. So if we go to administration, you can then create a auth key. You will need to create an auth key for your SIEM. So you want to do administration, create an auth key, and save this key somewhere because we're going to need this in a little bit. Once you've created your auth key, you then want to set up a feed. So if you go to sync actions and feeds, you can see I've already got LOLDrivers set up here. But if we take a look at it, it is quite simply just pull down this CSV, parse it, make it a fixed event, separate the comma values, auto publish, and then I did override the IDS flag because I don't think this would actually be used in an intrusion detection system. It would be more SIEM. And then you hit submit. So quite simply, you are dragging down the CSV. You are creating your intelligence from that CSV, and then we're going to distribute it into SIEM. So let's go back to our feeds here. And we can take a look at what's cached here. So if I go search, notice now I have a whole bunch of hashes and file names. So this is great. I've got the hashes. Well, that might be a problem for some of you because when you install a driver, does it give you the hash? Maybe, maybe not. In my lab, it does because I use sysmon, and I've talked about sysmon before. I highly encourage you to use sysmon. Sysmon will allow us not just to match the name or the file name, it'll allow us to match the hash. And for this to work well in your environment, you pretty much need this. Let's go back over to our host and let's take a look at what's generated. So if I go over here to Event Viewer, there are two events I'm extremely concerned about. The first one, matching on hash, which is the more effective indicator here, is sysmon event ID 6. And I'll refresh this just to make sure I've got the latest one. And I do. So we have image loaded from C Windows 10, zam64.sys. That was the driver I used. And here's the MD5 hash of that, the SHA-256 hash of that, and the imp hash of that. Now we're not going to be able to match on imp hash. We're going to match on either the SHA-256 or the MD5. But it also gives you the signature of what that is. So you can see Zamania Limited here, and the signature status of these drivers. These are valid signed drivers. They're just stolen. So we have sysmon. That is our major event. That's the one we're concerned about the most. The other event that we're going to be looking at is a simple service installation, because I did a service installation here under our normal logging, under our Windows logs. If we go to System, not Security, we will have an event for 7045. 7045 is the typical service installation. Now, why I concentrate on the Sysmon event ID 6 versus the 7040 or 7045 event is quite simply, this gets lost in the noise in most environments. There are so many services that are installed, it's very hard to get an accurate SIM rule based on this. Now, you certainly can do it the way that I'm going to show you here, where you're looking for the name. But that name, an adversary can change, right? They can put in random characters. So I wouldn't fully rely on this method. It's a good method to see if some administrator is installing a known bad driver in your environment. But an adversary, they're probably going to be smart enough to not use the service name that's based on the driver itself, unless they're really trying to blend in. If they're really trying to blend in, you might catch them. But we're going to have a rule that's based on service name and one that's based on the hash that we saw in the Sysmon event ID 6. So those two event IDs will feed into our Elastic SIEM. Now, in our Elastic SIEM, to make all this work, we need an integration. And in any SIEM, you need the ability to pull in threat intelligence. Now, luckily with Elastic, we have a built-in integration that will do MISP. So if we take a look at Fleet over here, and we can look at our, once it loads, I'm having a little trouble with the new 8.8 version and its speed here in my lab. Even though I have given 64 gigs of RAM to this thing, it is still quite slow. So bear with me on these particular pieces. And if it takes too long, I'll pause the video and we'll come back. All right, well, let's take a different approach. We'll go to integrations here instead of Fleet, and we'll go to installed integrations. Maybe this will move faster, but it should show us the MISP integration here. And there we go. So what we want to take a look at is the MISP integration here. So the MISP integration, when it loads, you give it the URL or host name of your MISP server. In this case, you don't give it the full API. So if you're looking at MISP and you go to administration and you go to, actually it is, I have to find it here. There's a lot of menus. It is API REST client. Actually, open API. Nope, still wrong. Home, automation. Don't give it these. It knows. Just give it the beginning. You don't need to give it attributes REST search or events REST search. You just give it the actual URL. And in this case, it's just the IP that I'm reaching it on. I didn't set up a host name in the lab. I don't need it really because it's a lab. In a real MISP installation, I highly recommend that you set it up to best practice, give it a host name, use Let's Encrypt, get an SSL cert, all of the things you would do for a normal server to make sure that it's working well. So now if we pop back over here to our Elastic SIEM and we look at our integration policy, which hopefully this will load quickly. Once we're in here, there's really only a couple settings you need to change. You need to give it your API key, which you wrote down earlier from MISP. You're then going to need to change the URL. And once you change the URL, you need to point it at the URL I just gave you. And if you're doing this in a lab and you don't have a trusted SSL certificate, you will need to change that. So once this loads here, and it is being very slow, I will show you the settings you need to change here to pull in MISP. Now, while this is loading, MISP is a fantastic platform for threat intel management. As you can see, here is an intrusion. You can even search for different intrusions. Now, when you create your feed, it's going to create an ID, and you need to give that a creator org as well. Notice there's 514 attributes as part of my my creator ID that I created there, my intrusion. That is the values that are coming from the feed. And if I go in here, I can see all the different information, right? Here's all the information from the feed. Here is whether it's published or not. Here is, I gave these tags of threat source OSINT and source OSINT, have it in unprotected mode. But you can see also the modification map when it's changed, and also anything that's related. So you can see some of these intrusions over here that are related to some of the things we have in this list already. They were using some of these known bad drivers. So if we hop back over here to Elastic SIEM and it finally loaded, we can take a look at our integration policy. Hopefully this doesn't take as long to load. And also, when you're setting up your feed, make sure that you take a look at the CSV value right here. If you're going to use MISP, MISP won't pull in via JSON like this. So you want to make sure you're pulling in via CSV. You literally just click this, and there's your data, right? You can see the CSV file that's pulled in. Any good threat intel management system can do the same thing, but you want to make sure you're using the CSV. So it is still loading here. I apologize for the wait. This SIEM has been killing me. It's because it's in a Docker container. It's not, fully standalone. Okay, finally loaded. So we have our TI MISP-1. That's the integration name by default. Things you need to change. The URL. You need to put in your API token. If you want to change the interval of pull, it's a default 10 minutes. I set it down to 5 minutes here in the lab just to get things to move faster. I did not set preserve original content. I did go into advanced options though, and because I don't have a SSL certificate, I made verification mode none. So on these, I have verification mode none. There's a second one down here. You want to do basically the same options. One is the attributes API and the other is the indicators API. Indicators API being your most important for this. But you want to make sure you set up both. Same thing down here. You're going to do exactly the same. And then you must assign this to a fleet policy. You can have this on basically any host. It does not have to have the Elastic agent installed on the MISP server to make this work. You can have it installed on another server because it reaches out and pulls the data in via the API. I did install the Elastic agent on the MISP server to make this happen. So it was just easier for me to do that. But if you have an environment where you don't know Linux really well, or you don't know how to install a certificate or install the agent on Linux, you may want to just have this on a Windows box. So that's your setup for the MISP integration. So post this, you should have data coming into your threat intel content. And then you want to build alerts. So let's take a look at our alerts. And our alerts here, we should have 2 that have fired due to the action we just took. And that would be the installation of that driver on the system. And you'll see when we look at these alerts that the alerts themselves are based purely on threat intelligence. I'm not looking for any specific names. I'm just looking for the events we talked about. I'm first looking for the service installation event, which is the 7045, event ID 7045. And then I am looking for sysmon event ID 6 with a specific Microsoft.sysmon provider. And you can see we have 3 alerts here. We have known bad driver hash match. We have known bad service name. Known bad service name means that we matched the zamguard.sys rule. And I'm getting errors down here. But if we take a look at these, should be able to add to timeline. We'll take a look at the first one, and then we'll pop our timeline down here. Open timeline. And it is loading. Well, while that's happening, we'll add both to timeline. Add to timeline. And then we'll pop our timeline up. This thing really is slow. I apologize. Let me see if I can just hit untitled. Okay, untitled worked. So notice it has a whole bunch of indicator matches here, and that's because I've got a problem with it sending the data in over and over and over again. But that's okay. We can see the known bad service name here matched an indicator rule of zamguard64.sys. Now, I did not provide that in the rule. That is provided by the threat intelligence. And then we matched a known bad MD5 hash here. So if we take a look at these, you can see this hash indicator match rule provided by MISP is matched. So we matched our event ID with the MD5 hash. Same thing here, we matched the name. So if we go take a look at these rules, and this should move a little faster because we're not hitting the index. So we'll go security manage. I'm not terribly concerned about those because I made them fire. And we go to rules. We're going to see 3 enabled rules. One is the default. And the default is good, but it fires very slowly. So there is the default threat intel indicator match rule. So this is provided by Elastic. Can't change it, can't do anything with it. It's slow to fire. It runs every hour, right? That doesn't work real well in a real environment. You would want to create your own rules. So let's take a look at first at the known bad service name rule. And we'll let this load. We'll hit edit rule settings. And if you're using Elastic Container, I don't recommend going to 8.8 yet. It's a bit slow on my indexes. And I've given this thing 64 gigs of RAM. I'm not sure why it's so slow. It also has 4 CPUs. So I think the Docker containers aren't perfectly optimized, or there's some kind of issue with either the Java system or something below it, but it is very, very slow to work. So we'll give it a minute here. And here we go. So our first rule, we're looking simply for event code 7045. That was the event code we were looking for. And then, wow, it didn't populate the indicator. So the indicator actually, it gave us an error. The indicator pattern match is to match threat feed name. Actually, it's file name. Now, we're going to go back to our other view here. You can see winlog event data service name matches threat indicator file name. Since it's erroring so much, I apologize. But you're going to do winlog event data service name matching your threat indicator file name. And this would work in whatever SIEM you have. So you're matching your threat indicator, and you're going to match it on event code 7045. So if you take a look, the 7045 event provides a name, and that name is the service name, which would match your threat indicator file name. Now, our other rule, we'll go ahead and confirm. We're going to go to rules here. And we're going to take a look at known bad service name. So known bad service name here, we would have winlog event. Actually, that's the wrong one. I apologize, or it is still loading. No, that's service name. That is the wrong one. We want to do known bad driver hash match. And when this loads, it's going to show you we're basically matching the threat intel feed for the MD5, SHA-1, and SHA-256 hashes. And it's quite simple. It's very much like the default threat rule. It's just going to run faster because I have it tuned way down to run on a very fast interval for, demo purposes. I don't recommend having your SIEM rules run, every 1 minute. maybe every 5 minutes for performance concerns, but having it a low number is better for a response procedure. You don't want to give it an hour to fire. So if you give it an hour to fire, you're already behind the 8 ball if this really is an adversary. So the rule is loading. If it keeps loading, I will pause the video, and as you can see, I'm getting load index failures. All right. If it doesn't load here in a second, I'm going to pause the video and restart my Elastic containers, and then I will proceed. Oh, there it goes. Right as I say, I'm going to pause the video. So what we're looking for with this rule is we're looking for event code 6. And event code 6 is Sysmon's driver installation. We're then looking for the event provider of Microsoft Windows Sysmon. Why are we doing this? We are doing this because other things will generate event code 6. Other Windows things will generate event code 6. So I locked it down further to Microsoft Windows Sysmon as my event provider. The rule type is an indicator match. Our patterns are logged TI, that is your threat intelligence log. And then we were simply looking for file hash MD5 matches threat indicator MD5 or SHA-1 or SHA-256 with our timestamp going now to 30 days. And that's basically how you would alert on this. The other rule that can do this by default is your threat indicator match rule. I don't think this one is going to take as long to load. It may. If it doesn't, I'll just cut it off here. But this one will match anything that is in your threat indicator feeds across any log that comes into the system. This one is a very wide rule. It's also harder to control from a use case perspective because you may see an indicator match, but unless your analysts know exactly what to do after that, they may not. They may not know what happened, right? Oh, cool, I've got an indicator match. Does that mean that a service was installed? Does that mean that I can easily know what precursed that? That's why I like creating my own rules and making sure that they match exactly the use case that you're going to have for your SIEM and SOC services. Because, analysts typically an early role in people's security careers. At least a lot of junior analysts may not exactly know what to look for. Your senior analyst, yeah, they'll be fine. But your junior analysts, if they just saw look, I matched an MD5 hash on a threat intel feed, does that really mean anything to them? May not. So create your use cases in a pointed way and make sure that you're documenting them. And as you can see, this is generic threat match timeline. File MD5 matches threat indicator MD5. This one just matches MD5, SHA-1, 256, imp hash, IP, or URL. So basically anything that could be in your TI data set. It is just a very slow scheduled rule. Runs every 1 hour. That's not very fast, right? And I'm sure they did this for performance reasons, but a rule running every 1 hour means that in most modern SOCs, you're already behind the 8 ball when this fires. You would be an hour out from when I did my privilege escalation before you would detect it. So make sure you're creating your rules in a pointed way. And that's basically all I have for you this week. I know we focused on blue team a little more than red, but I think they were due. So thank you very much for watching, and hack the planet to defend better.